There are places in this world that do not just feel haunted, they seem alive, as if the land itself refuses to release its memories. In Kentucky, the shadows cling longer. The silence is not silence at all, but a low hum, and even the roads feel like they are guiding you somewhere you were never meant to go. These are not stories polished for campfires, not whispers invented to scare children into obedience. They are real accounts, tied to real soil, and spoken by people who swore they would never repeat what they had seen, but could not forget. A house that should not exist yet moves across the mountains. A stretch of road that screams in voices that do not belong to the living. A baptism site where those who enter are never quite the same when they emerge. Lights that fall from the sky but never hit the ground. Tunnels beneath a prison where the air itself bends and walls seem to breathe. A house that reappears only when it chooses you. And a piece of earth that does not just swallow what stands on it, it remembers what it takes. So before we go any further, close your doors, draw the curtains, and remind yourself to keep breathing. Because once Kentucky looks back at you, it does not look away. These are 6 mysteries hidden in plain sight, stories etched into the hills and valleys, waiting to be unearthed. They connect not as isolated tales, but like threads of one vast web, tied together by a force that refuses to stay buried. Some are whispered about in daylight, others only spoken of in hushed voices after midnight, but all of them ask the same question: what happens when the land itself keeps its secrets better than we do? And so we begin, not with ghosts, but with something far stranger. Something that moves when no one is watching, and waits for the moment you step too close. Mystery number 1. The Vanishing House of Big Black Mountain. Some mysteries hide in the dark, others right in front of you. But the most unnerving ones are those that vanish the moment you try to prove they were ever real. Deep in the remote ridges of Big Black Mountain, the highest peak in Kentucky, where mist drapes the forest like a shroud, there are whispers of a house that does not stay put. It is not marked on any map, and yet those who've seen it describe it the same way, every time. An old wooden cabin, its porch sagging dangerously to one side, a chimney cracked in two, and a front door left slightly ajar as though someone had just stepped inside. No windows. None at all. The house does not wait in one location, it drifts. Some say it slides between ridges, others believe it fades in and out of time itself. But always it appears when no one expects it. The first stories rose in the early 1980s, when 2 bow hunters went missing on the mountain for nearly 17 hours. When they were found, their faces were pale, their eyes glassy, and their clothes damp with sweat, despite the cold. They said they would taken shelter from a sudden fog inside a cabin that appeared right off the trail. But once they entered, the silence was crushing, stale as though no breath had been drawn there for 100 years. The fireplace yawned open, though the hearth was missing, torn from the wall, and behind the boards they swore something whispered. When search teams returned, there was no cabin at all. Just solid, unbroken ground, where they swore it had stood. And yet, that was only the beginning. In 1997, a forestry student from Eastern Kentucky University marked the house's location, even snapped a photograph. When he came back the next day with his professor, the forest had reclaimed everything. The photo he would taken was ruined, blurred into nothing but streaks of gray, and his compass no longer worked, its needle spinning endlessly. Other accounts tell of trail cameras that refuse to record, drones that lose their signal, and footage that deletes itself when the lens points toward that cursed stretch east of Black Ridge Loop. Officials call it magnetic interference, labeling the region non-developable land. But locals do not buy it. Some whisper the house is a geological echo, a memory pressed into the stone like a scratch on vinyl that keeps repeating. Others say it was built over unmarked burial grounds, torn apart when mining companies carved through the mountains in the 1940s. But the most chilling explanation is simpler, that the house is looking for someone to stay. One winter, a wildlife officer patrolling a firebreak path claimed he heard deliberate footsteps behind him. He turned. Nothing. He turned back, and there it was, 20 feet away, the cabin itself, door yawning open into blackness. He walked away slowly, never daring to glance inside. When he turned again, it was gone. But perhaps the most disturbing story came decades later, in 2016. A hiker posted on a regional forum that he would seen the house, entered it, and inside the rotten wooden walls were photographs of his own family nailed in neat rows. The thread vanished, his account deleted, as though the internet itself swallowed the evidence. Some say the house is not on the mountain, it is the mountain. That it surfaces when fog, silence, and pressure fall into perfect alignment. Others believe the land itself remembers grief, regret, and endings without closure and builds monuments to them in wood and stone. But everyone who has ever seen it agrees on one thing. It knew they were coming. It waits. Not for anyone, but for someone. And if the mountain hides a house that watches, what else does it hide beneath the ground, waiting for its turn to be heard? Mystery number 2. The underground screams of Sleepy Hollow Road. If a house can appear and vanish like a living shadow, then what waits beneath us may be worse still. Just outside Louisville runs a narrow ribbon of asphalt winding through the trees. By daylight, it feels almost peaceful, birds flitting through the branches, sunlight breaking through the green canopy, the kind of road you would drive without a second thought. When the sun sinks and darkness presses in, Sleepy Hollow Road becomes something else entirely. The locals say the road does not just carry cars. It screams, not the high shrieks of tires, not the groan of engines, but long, hollow, human-like screams that rise from the ground itself. They echo from beneath the pavement, stretching through the night until your chest tightens, as if the sound is inside you, not around you. And no one has ever found where the voices come from. The first reports date back to the 1930s, when horse-drawn wagons still rattled through the holler. Farmers complained of phantom cries carrying across the fields, of cattle refusing to cross certain bends, and of an invisible vibration humming under the wheels. They said the air itself felt metallic, like a wire stretched too tight. But by the 1970s, the unease had sharpened into terror. Police logs show multiple 911 calls, voices begging for help, screams of a woman lost near the creek bend, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Patrols scoured the area each time, flashlights sweeping the woods. They never found a body, never a trespasser, not even footprints. But absence does not mean silence. Drivers began to report other things, pale figures crouching beneath the old iron bridge, thin lights flaring from the road into the trees like sparks leaping into the night. And the most unsettling sight, a tall man with no eyes, only hollow sockets sunk deep into his face. He stood at the bend without moving, silent, and if you blinked, he was gone. The county tried to solve the mystery with asphalt and shovels. They filled potholes, repaved sections, even cut shallow trenches beneath the road to check for sinkholes or wildlife. What they found instead was worse, an abandoned tunnel shaft carved into the rock, likely a bootlegger's route during Prohibition. But the inside told another story. Its walls were charred black, beams burned to ash, and deep gouges scarred the stone, claw marks pressed outward as if something had tried to escape. No official report tied the tunnel to the screams, but the stories only grew darker. In 1999, a teenage couple's car stalled just beyond the creek bend. At first, they thought it was the engine. Then they heard it chains, dragging beneath the car, scraping across the undercarriage. A voice followed, a whisper curling through the back seat as if someone was already inside with them. They bolted, abandoning the car until daylight. When they returned, the back seat had been ripped open from the inside. The floor was slick, with something the color of rust that smelled of nothing at all. Local legends suggest the road was cursed long before pavement touched it, that unmarked graves lie beneath its curves, bodies of those who faced frontier justice with no marker to remember them. Others claim it is a thin place, where time bends, sound twists, and the past seeps upward like water through cracks. But the strangest part is this. No matter how many times crews repave or dig, the screams always return. They do not weaken, they do not fade, they wait. Because some roads take you home, others take something from you. And on Sleepy Hollow Road, when you stop long enough to listen, it feels as though the earth itself wants to speak through you. And if the ground can scream, then maybe it can also burn with light, because not all things above Kentucky fall up into the heavens. Some fall down, and when they land, they do not leave. Mystery number 3. The falling lights of Pikeville. Some mysteries claw their way out of the ground. Others fall from the sky. In the far eastern corner of Kentucky, in the coal town of Pikeville, the mountains rise steep. The valleys run quiet, and the air smells faintly of stone and ash. It is a proud place, a town carved from rock, but above it the sky is restless. For generations, people here have watched lights descend, not stars, not planes, not anything we can name. They call them skydroppers, bright orbs that hover low over the ridges, shifting colors like breathing fire, then plummeting toward the earth as if to crash only to vanish just before impact. They do not flicker like meteors, they do not roar like aircraft, and they leave no trail of smoke. Instead, they fall silently, deliberately, and sometimes what follows is worse than the sight itself. FAA records from the 1970s mention unexplained aerial anomalies over Pikeville. Pilots spoke of orbs plunging toward the mountains, glowing like fireballs but with no sound, no heat. The reports were logged and filed away as unresolved, but the people who live there have never been able to file it away. Farmers tell of entire patches of land that turn dead after the lights descend, grass wilting, soil hardening, crops refusing to grow. Hunters have stumbled on deer standing stiff and frozen, eyes wide, bodies unmoving for hours, as if time itself paused. And then there was the mine worker in 1993. He claimed he found a hollow of melted stone inside the mountain, a cavity the size of a truck glowing faint blue, surrounded by discarded tools that no longer worked. His flashlight, dead. His radio, useless. Even his watch stopped ticking. When he left, he told his brother one line he never explained. It was not a crash. It was a delivery. He never returned to the mine again. The strangest story came from a local pastor in 2007. Driving home from an evening prayer meeting, he saw 3 lights hovering low over a ridge. They pulsed together in rhythm, like a single heartbeat. He stopped his car, stepped out, and began to pray. When he opened his eyes, the lights were gone, and so was the road beneath his feet. He was standing on bare earth, no pavement, no car. Just dirt, as though for those seconds, the road itself had been erased. Then it all returned, exactly as it was, except the lights had vanished. In 2019, a team of independent researchers sent a drone toward a sealed mine entrance just outside town. The footage shows a pulsing glow from within, lasting only 11 seconds before the drone failed. Its GPS and gyroscope both cutting out at once. The video survived, but the coordinates were wiped clean, as if something had erased its own location. Skeptics argue swamp gas, mining residue, experimental aircraft. But Pikeville residents disagree. They say the lights do not want to be explained. They choose who sees them. And the most unsettling claim is that they do not just fall, they search. Because some mysteries come from beneath the soil, some walk the back roads, and some fall from the sky like questions no one should ask. But Kentucky holds darker places still, where tunnels beneath stone prisons whisper louder than the inmates they are built to contain. Mystery number 4. The Forbidden Tunnels of Eddyville Prison. If lights can fall from the sky and erase roads from beneath your feet, then what waits under stone and steel may be worse still. Along the banks of Lake Barkley stands a fortress of limestone, iron and razor wire. The Kentucky State Penitentiary, built in 1886, looms over the water like a Gothic castle. Locals call it the Castle on the Cumberland, and from a distance it looks like a monument to human control. A place built to cage the darkest parts of society, but underneath, beneath the stone foundations and rusting pipes, lies something even darker. Tunnels. Miles of them, dug for utilities, secret movements during riots, and passages meant only for guards. But somewhere along the decades, the tunnels grew deeper, stretched farther, beyond anything mapped or documented. And now they are sealed, avoided, left off the official blueprints. Not because they collapsed, not because they are useless, but because something down there refuses to be forgotten. In 1974, 3 guards were assigned to escort a repairman through one of the western corridors. 10 minutes later, only 2 returned. The third was found hours later, unconscious on the floor, his uniform damp with sweat, his eyes staring past the ceiling. When he woke, he babbled about voices in the stone, about seeing a man where there was no room for one to stand. He said the man was not breathing, was not blinking, and the wall itself seemed to shift around him. After that, the western tunnel was sealed. But sealing stone does not stop whispers. Inmates began to report footsteps echoing behind the walls, shadows gliding across barred windows with no light source, and the dragging of chains when no work detail was scheduled. One prisoner swore he was haunted by a man with no mouth, barefoot, who sat cross-legged at the foot of his bed each night. When guards checked the cell, nothing was there except the concrete floor, slick with water, though no pipes had burst. A night shift officer years later confessed that standing near the sealed tunnel doors warped time itself. Radios would cut out, clocks lost minutes, and the very air pressed heavier against the lungs. He once believed he had been staring at the tunnel mouth for only 10 minutes. When he checked his watch, 45 had passed. Behind the walls, he swore something whistled, a slow, tuneless note that crawled into his head. The prison denies all of it, of course. On paper, the tunnels are just infrastructure too costly to maintain, too unstable to use. But guards pass warnings to each other quietly, like contraband advice. Never walk the eastern corridor alone, never pause by the sealed doors, and if you hear chains where no chains should be, leave before you turn around. Theories swirl. Some believe escaped prisoners built secret passageways and died lost underground. Others whisper about older rituals, ceremonies long before the penitentiary was built, when the land was used for things never recorded. But those who've been closest to the sealed walls agree on one chilling thought. These tunnels were not built to move people, they were built to contain something that should never be let out. And if the ground can hold secrets that heavy, then what happens when the land itself builds structures of its own houses that appear where no foundation was ever laid, and that vanish once you have seen too much? Mystery number 5, the shifting house of Jackson Hollow. Some prisons are built to keep something in, but some houses appear to invite something out. Deep in the remote valleys of Jackson Hollow, where overgrown coal roads disappear into the trees, and trails vanish beneath moss, hikers whisper about a house that does not belong to the earth at all. Not haunted, not abandoned, unanchored. The first account surfaced in 1972, when a team of forestry surveyors stumbled across a one-room wooden cabin tucked just off an old fire road. It was weathered but intact. Windows painted over from the inside, a chimney split down the middle, and in the very center of the room, a wooden chair facing a blank wall. They marked its location on a map. 2 weeks later, when a second team went to verify the site, they found only trees and underbrush, as if no clearing had ever existed. At first, they blamed it on error until the reports kept piling up. Hunters, campers, utility workers all described the same house, always identical in detail, never in the same place twice, and each time it vanished, it left behind no clearing, no path, no sign that wood or stone had ever touched the ground. Inside, the house was stranger still. The fireplace was cold and spotless, as though no fire had ever burned. The walls bore no nails, no seams, and always, that single chair facing the wall, a circle scorched into the floor beneath it. In 1986, a hiker carried a camera and tried to outsmart the thing. When he developed his film, every photo was blank except one. A blurry image of the chair, and behind the fogged glass of a painted window, what looked like a hand pressed against the inside. Wolfe County residents refused to speak of it. Some whisper the land was once a burial ground from the 1800s, later disturbed when mining companies cut through. Others claim the cabin belonged to a surveyor who vanished in 1913, last seen sketching something into the dirt before he stepped into the trees and never returned. But the strangest detail of all, no one has ever seen the house twice. Even those who return with maps, GPS, and equipment find nothing. The house appears only once for each person, as if it chooses who sees it. In 2014, a researcher from Lexington left a trail cam in the area. For hours, the footage showed nothing. Then, at precisely 3 a.m., the screen glitched, frames breaking apart into static. For 14 seconds, one frame appeared the house, fully formed, standing where no house had been before. At the end of the clip, a faint voice whispered, just loud enough to hear, "You were supposed to sit down." The researcher never returned to Jackson Hollow. Now, hikers who know the land pass warnings as quietly as prayers. If you find a house that should not be there, do not step inside. And if you do not sit. Because the moment you take the chair, you may never rise in the same world again. And if the land can build a house that moves through the woods, what happens when the ground itself refuses to let you leave, when the very earth remembers your name and pulls you beneath it? Mystery number 6, the sinking ground of Ballard County. Some houses vanish, some reappear, but there is a place in Kentucky where the land itself becomes the predator. Near the marshes of Ballard County, where the Mississippi and Ohio rivers meet, and the soil is soft as breath, locals whisper about a stretch they call the ground that does not let go. It is not on maps. It does not need to be. Farmers, hikers, and rescue crews know the warning signs. Once the earth begins to hum beneath you, it is already too late. The first story dates back to 1921. A family of sharecroppers vanished overnight. Their farmhouse was discovered half sunken into the soil, windows blown outward, the entire back end missing, as though pulled straight down. No bodies were ever recovered. Only long, deep grooves led into a depression that filled with water before morning. Authorities called it a landslide, but the land was flat, far too flat. The mud had not shifted. Geologists who studied the site said nothing about it made sense, and then they left. More stories followed. Tractors swallowed whole, their engines silenced mid-turn. Herds of cattle gone by dawn. Only shallow depressions marking where they once stood. Even emergency vehicles caught in the mire, their tires melting into the earth as if the ground itself had turned liquid. Hours later, the terrain hardened again, smooth as stone, with no sign anything had ever been lost. In 1989, a teenager named Travis McKay went hiking at night. His last phone call to his girlfriend was nothing more than a whisper, the ground's humming like it is breathing, who was never seen again. Search teams found his footprints circling in confusion, then stopping dead at a patch of earth that looked undisturbed. Satellite imaging in 2007 revealed something stranger still. Beneath the marshes south of Wycliffe, faint grid-like patterns emerged, nearly perfect squares buried under layers of silt. Some believe it was a long-forgotten settlement, drowned by shifting rivers. Others say it was a military test site, erased and left to sink. But older residents speak of something darker, that the ground remembers what was buried there before settlers ever arrived, and sometimes it hungers to add more. One retired firefighter, called to a missing persons case in 1994, swears he found the man's belongings neatly folded on dry earth, boots, pack, clothes, all in a careful pile. No tracks led away, only a wet trail glistening across the grass that ended in nothing. He said it looked like something had risen up, swallowed, then receded, as if the earth itself had taken a breath. Even now, Ballard County officials quietly discourage visitors from hiking the southern marshes. There are no fences, no signs, just warnings. Some say if you stand very still, you will feel it, the faint vibration beneath your feet, the soil shifting almost imperceptibly, like a voice speaking from under the mud. The trees lean inward when there is no wind. The air thickens. And then, just as suddenly, it is gone. But those who return claim the same thing. Once you have stood on that ground, you will never forget it. Because in Ballard County, the earth does more than bury, it remembers. And when it remembers, it does not let go. And so 6 mysteries rise and vanish through Kentucky, houses that wander, roads that scream, lights that fall, tunnels that whisper, prisons that contain more than men, and marshes that breathe. Yet they are not separate threads. They are a single weave of land and memory, tied together by something too old, too patient, and too silent to name. 6 mysteries. 6 shadows sewn into the soil of Kentucky. Each story different in its details, yet all echoing the same truth that the land itself is alive with memory, and it does not forget. A cabin that moves as if it were hunting. A road that screams with voices that never die. Lights that fall from the sky not to vanish but to deliver. Tunnels beneath a prison that whisper of things never meant to walk free. A shifting house that waits for someone to sit down and never rise again. And a stretch of earth that breathes, swallows, and remembers your name. They are not fragments. They are pieces of one body, Kentucky itself. A place where silence is not silence but a warning. Where shadows cling not to scare you, but to remind you that something else is watching. Some of these mysteries appear in daylight, others only at the hour when the air hangs heavy and the birds go silent. But each of them teaches the same lesson. The land has secrets, and the more you look, the more it begins to look back. So if you have made it this far, ask yourself which of these haunted you most. Was it the cabin that shifts when you turn your head? The screams rising from beneath your tires? The lights that erase roads, or the tunnels that erase time? Maybe it was the house in Jackson Hollow that whispered you were supposed to sit down, or the earth in Ballard County that hums like a throat clearing before it takes you. Comment below which secret you would dare to face, and tell us where we should go next, because every state has places like these, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone foolish enough to listen. And one final warning. Kentucky's shadows do not always wait for you to come to them. Sometimes, they already know where you are. Sometimes, by the time you finish listening, They are closer than you think. So when the lights flicker, when the house creaks though no one's inside, when the silence feels heavy instead of still, do not dismiss it. Don't tell yourself it is nothing. Because once the land remembers you, once it decides you belong to it, no locked door, no prayer, no morning sun will keep it from finding you again. Now tell me, are you sure you are still alone in the room?